When she stepped onto my bus at that remote Nevada stop, and I heard her say the name Lily, followed by those three words that would shatter and rebuild my entire world in the span of a heartbeat, I knew that some moments in life arrive not as coincidences, but as divine appointments that have been decades in the making. If you believe that love can survive the longest separations, and that family bonds transcend time, distance, and even the most painful mistakes we make in our youth, then settle in for a story that will remind you why hope should never be abandoned, no matter how many years have passed since you last dared to believe in second chances. My name is Robert Martinez, and I've been driving interstate bus routes for 45 years, traveling the same highways between Reno and Salt Lake City so many times that I could navigate them blindfolded. But this isn't just another story about life on America's endless roads. This is about how a routine Wednesday afternoon in September became the day I discovered that sometimes the most important passengers we pick up aren't going somewhere new, but coming home to places and people they never knew existed. And sometimes the family we spend our whole lives missing has been looking for us just as desperately as we've been searching for them. It was September 22nd, one of those crisp autumn days when the Nevada desert shows its gentler side, with temperatures in the comfortable 70s, and a sky so clear you could see the distant mountains painted against the horizon like a watercolor masterpiece. I was making my regular eastbound run on Highway 50, what locals call the loneliest road in America, though I've never found it lonely when you understand that every mile of empty space is filled with stories waiting to be discovered. Mile marker 184, just outside Fallon, Nevada, at a truck stop that's seen better decades but still serves the strongest coffee and most honest conversations you'll find anywhere in the American West. She was sitting on the bench outside the station when I pulled the bus around for our scheduled 15-minute rest stop, and something about the way she held herself, something about the angle of her shoulders and the way her dark hair caught the afternoon sunlight, made me look twice before I even saw her face clearly. My 12 passengers filed off for bathroom breaks and snack purchases, the usual routine that gives me a few minutes to check tire pressure and fluid levels, but I found myself glancing repeatedly toward that bench where the young woman sat, with a worn canvas backpack at her feet, and an expression that seemed to carry the weight of questions that had been unanswered for far too long. She couldn't have been more than 25, with olive skin that suggested mixed heritage, and eyes that held the kind of determined sadness that comes from someone who's been searching for something crucial for years, without knowing if they'll ever find it. When our eyes met across the parking lot, I felt a jolt of recognition that I couldn't immediately place, the unsettling sensation that occurs when your brain knows something important that your conscious mind hasn't figured out yet. She stood up slowly, shouldering her backpack with the careful movements of someone who's been traveling for a long time on a very tight budget, and started walking toward the bus with steps that seemed both hesitant and purposeful. "Excuse me," she said as she approached, her voice carrying a slight tremor that suggested she'd been rehearsing this moment, but still wasn't sure how to begin. "Is this the bus heading toward Salt Lake City?" There was something familiar about her voice too, something that tugged at memories I couldn't quite access, like trying to remember a song you heard in childhood, but can only recall fragments of the melody. "Yes, miss, it is," I replied, studying her face more carefully and feeling that strange recognition growing stronger with each passing second. "Are you planning to travel all the way to Salt Lake, or do you have a stop somewhere in between?" She fumbled in her jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled bus ticket, the kind of worn paper that suggests it's been carried around for weeks or months, waiting for just the right moment to be used. "Actually, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going," she said, and the honesty in her admission caught me off guard. Most passengers know their destination, even if they're uncertain about what they'll find when they get there. "I'm looking for someone I've never met, but who might be traveling this route regularly. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been riding different bus lines for 3 months now, hoping I might find him." The way she said it, the careful hope mixed with realistic preparation for disappointment, told me this wasn't a casual search. This was someone pursuing the kind of connection that becomes more important than comfort, more necessary than security, more urgent than any other consideration in life. I've been driving long enough to recognize the difference between passengers who are running towards something and passengers who are running away from something, and this young woman was definitely moving toward a hope she'd been carrying for far longer than 3 months. "What's your name, miss?" I asked gently, preparing to help her board while simultaneously trying to understand why my instincts were telling me this conversation was going to become more significant than a simple ticket check and seating assignment. "Lily?" she said, then paused as if deciding whether to share more information. "Lily Hernandez. And the person I'm looking for, his name is Robert Martinez. I was told he works for this bus company. Drives routes in Nevada and Utah, has been doing it for a really long time. I know it's a long shot, but I had to try." The world stopped spinning. Everything around me became suddenly silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears like thunder. Robert Martinez. She was looking for Robert Martinez, and I was Robert Martinez. But how could this young woman possibly be connected to me when I'd spent 45 years carefully avoiding the kind of personal connections that might complicate my simple, solitary life on the road? "Miss," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended, "I'm Robert Martinez." Her eyes widened and filled with tears so quickly that I instinctively reached out to steady her, afraid she might collapse right there in the truck stop parking lot. She stared at my face with desperate intensity, searching for something she'd apparently been hoping to find for years, comparing my features to some mental image she'd been carrying around like a photograph she'd never actually seen. Were you ever in Phoenix, Arizona? Around 26 years ago?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you know a woman named Maria Hernandez? She was 19, worked at a diner near the university, had long black hair and brown eyes, and the most beautiful smile you'd ever seen. Maria." The name hit me like a physical blow, bringing back memories I'd spent decades trying to bury under the weight of routine, responsibility, and the kind of regret that comes from making choices based on fear instead of love. Maria Hernandez, who I'd met during the summer of 1998 when I was 22 years old and driving my first solo routes for a smaller bus company. Maria, who had served me coffee and homemade pie at that little diner on Van Buren Street every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 months. Maria, who had laughed at my terrible jokes and listened to my dreams about seeing every state in America from behind the wheel of something bigger than my own life. Maria, who had told me she was pregnant on a scorching August afternoon just 2 weeks before I was scheduled to transfer to the Nevada routes, who had looked at me with hope and terror when she asked if I wanted to build a life together in Phoenix, raising the child we'd created during those magical summer nights when we talked about everything, except the possibility that our casual romance might turn into the kind of permanent responsibility that would change everything we thought we knew. About our futures, I had run. Not physically, not immediately, but emotionally and practically. I had chosen the road over the restaurant, the solitude of long-distance driving over the uncertainty of fatherhood, the safety of my own company over the risk of failing someone who deserved better than a young man who wasn't sure he was ready to become the kind of person a child and a woman like Maria needed him to be. "So you're her daughter," I said, the words coming out as a statement rather than a question because everything about Lily's face was confirming what my heart had started to suspect the moment she'd said Maria's name. "You're Maria's daughter. I'm your daughter," Lily said quietly, tears streaming down her face now without any attempt to hide them. "Mom told me about you when she was dying 2 years ago. She said your name was Robert Martinez, that you drove buses, that you were kind and funny and scared, and that she never blamed you for leaving because she understood that some people need to find themselves before they can find their way to other people. The rest of my passengers were starting to return to the bus, and I knew I had a schedule to maintain, responsibilities to fulfill, a job to complete. But I also knew that this moment was more important than any schedule, more crucial than any company policy, more necessary than anything else that might happen during the rest of my working life. "Lily," I said, my voice breaking on her name, "would you like to sit up front with me for the rest of this trip? I think we have a lot to talk about." The next 4 hours between Fallon and Salt Lake City became the most important conversation of my life, as Lily and I pieced together 26 years of separation with the careful attention that archaeologists give to reconstructing ancient pottery from scattered fragments. She sat in the front seat directly behind me, leaning forward so we could talk without disturbing the other passengers, and slowly, carefully, we began building the bridge between the father I should have been and the daughter I never knew I had. Maria had raised Lily alone, working double shifts at various restaurants and diners throughout Phoenix while attending night school to become a licensed practical nurse. She'd never married, though she'd had relationships over the years, men who cared about her and treated Lily well, but who never quite filled the space that had been left empty when I drove away that August morning in 1998. Lily described her mother as someone who loved deeply and forgave easily, who talked about me not with bitterness or resentment, but with the kind of understanding that comes from someone who recognized that people make choices based on where they are in their lives, rather than where they wish they could be. "She used to tell me stories about you," Lily said, her voice soft enough that only I could hear her over the gentle rumble of the bus engine and the quiet conversations happening behind us. How you knew the names of all the regular customers at the diner, how you always left exactly 25% tips, even when you were obviously counting your money carefully, how you talked about the different landscapes you'd seen, as if they were old friends you visited regularly. She said you had this way of making ordinary things sound magical, like you could find beauty in places other people would drive right past without noticing. The description hit me harder than I expected, because it reminded me of who I used to be before 45 years of solitude had worn away the edges of my enthusiasm for sharing discoveries with other people. I'd forgotten that version of myself, the young man who saw poetry in sunrise over desert mountains and found stories in every small town where we stopped for fuel and food. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped looking for magic and started simply completing routes, stopped seeking beauty, and started just fulfilling obligations. "What happened to her?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. "You said she was dying 2 years ago. What took her away?" Lily was quiet for several miles, watching the Nevada landscape roll past the window while gathering the strength to revisit the hardest period of her life. Ovarian cancer. By the time they found it, it had already spread too far for treatment to make much difference. She fought for 8 months, stayed positive until the very end, but mostly she worried about me. She was afraid I'd never know where I came from, never understand that I was wanted even if I wasn't planned, never realize that sometimes the best gifts in life come from connections that seem impossible to maintain. The weight of 26 years of missed opportunities settled on my shoulders, like a physical burden I'd been unconsciously carrying without realizing how heavy it had become. 26 birthdays I'd missed, 26 Christmases, where I could have been watching a little girl grow into the remarkable young woman sitting behind me. 26 years of Maria raising our daughter alone while I drove circles around the western United States, telling myself I was living an independent life, when really I was just avoiding the kind of deep connections that make life meaningful. "She made me promise that I'd try to find you," Lily continued, "not because she thought you owed us anything or because she wanted you to feel guilty about the choices you made when you were young, but because she believed you deserved to know what came from that summer you spent together. She said every child should know both their parents if possible, and every parent deserves the chance to know their child, even if the timing isn't perfect and the circumstances aren't ideal." I had to pull the bus over at the next rest area, not because of any mechanical issue or schedule requirement, but because I needed a few minutes to process information that was reshaping everything I thought I understood about my own life story. I announced a 20-minute break to the passengers, most of whom were dozing anyway, and walked with Lily to a picnic table overlooking the vast emptiness of central Nevada, where we could continue this conversation without the responsibilities of driving and the presence of strangers. "Lily," I said, sitting across from her at the weathered wooden table, "I need you to know that leaving wasn't about not wanting you or not caring about your mother. I was 22 years old, barely making enough money to support myself, living week to week and route to route without any kind of stability or security. I convinced myself that Maria deserved someone better, someone who could provide the kind of life a child should have, someone who had something more to offer than uncertainty and constant travel." She reached across the table and took my hand, her touch gentle but firm, and I realized this was the first time I'd touched my own daughter, the first physical connection between us in a life that should have been filled with hugs, bedtime stories, shared meals, and all the small daily interactions that build relationships between parents and children. "Dad," she said, and the word made my heart stop completely. Mum understood. She never wanted you to feel trapped or obligated. She said love should always be a choice, not a burden, and she'd rather raise me alone with stories about a good man who wasn't ready than try to build a family with someone who felt forced into it. But she also said that people change, that 22 isn't 48, and that maybe someday you'd be ready for connections you couldn't handle when you were younger. The math hit me suddenly. If I was 48 now, and Lily was 26, that meant I'd become a father at 22 and spent more than half my life not knowing about it. More than half my life driving past towns where I could have stopped to visit. Highways that could have led me back to Phoenix. Opportunities to be part of something bigger and more important than my solitary journey across America's endless roads. But here, at this rest stop in the middle of nowhere, Nevada, my daughter had found me. After 3 months of riding buses and hoping for a miracle, after 2 years of carrying her mother's dying wish, after 26 years of growing up without knowing her father's face or voice, Lily had managed to locate the one person in the world who could answer the questions that had shaped her entire identity. Before I continue with what happened next, I need to pause and talk directly to those of you who are listening to this story right now. If you're still with me after everything Lily and I have shared so far, it tells me something profound about who you are as a person. It tells me you understand that love doesn't have expiration dates, that family bonds can survive decades of separation, that it's never too late to choose connection over isolation, relationship over regret. This isn't just entertainment for you, is it? This is hope that speaks to something deep in your own heart, whether you're someone who's been searching for family, someone who's made choices you wish you could revisit, or someone who believes that second chances are among life's greatest gifts. Every time you listen to stories like this, every time you open your heart to the possibility that love can triumph over time and distance and fear, you're participating in something sacred, something that reminds all of us that we're not meant to journey through life alone. If Lily's courage in spending 3 months looking for a father she'd never met has touched your soul, if my story of finally understanding what I'd been missing all these years has reminded you of connections in your own life that deserve attention, I'd love for you to become part of our family here. Don't just hit that subscribe button because you want to hear more stories, but because you believe that sharing our experiences helps heal the loneliness that too many people carry in silence. Leave a comment and tell us about times when you found family in unexpected places, moments when love proved stronger than time, or situations where you had to choose between safety and connection. This community exists for people who understand that the most beautiful stories are often about ordinary people, making extraordinary choices to love each other despite imperfect circumstances and complicated histories. As we continued our journey towards Salt Lake City, Lily began sharing details about her life that filled in the picture of the woman my daughter had become, and I found myself simultaneously proud of her achievements and heartbroken by all the moments I'd missed along the way. She'd graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in social work, spending her college years volunteering at homeless shelters and women's crisis centers, drawn to helping people who felt disconnected from family and community support systems. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that she'd dedicated her professional life to reuniting people with their families while searching for her own missing parent. "I work with teenagers in foster care," she explained, as we passed through the small towns of central Utah, communities that looked exactly the same as they had when I'd first started driving this route decades ago. Kids who've been separated from their biological families for various reasons, who spend years wondering if their parents ever think about them, if they were wanted, if there's someone out there who might love them, if they could just find each other. I think I was drawn to that work because I understood what it felt like to have questions without answers, to love someone you've never met, to hope for connections that might never happen. The parallel between her professional calling and her personal journey was both beautiful and tragic, and I realized that my absence from her life had shaped not just her childhood, but her entire career path. She'd turned her own experience of searching for family into a mission to help other people find the connections they needed, transforming her personal pain into a source of healing for others who understood the particular loneliness that comes from not knowing where you belong in the world. "Did you ever get married?" I asked, wondering about the other relationships in her life, the people who'd provided the love and support that should have come from parents and extended family. "I was engaged for 2 years," she said, a note of sadness creeping into her voice, "to a wonderful man named David who understood my need to search for you and supported my decision to take time off work and spend my savings riding buses across the western states. But about 6 months ago, He said he couldn't compete with a ghost anymore, couldn't build a future with someone who was still so focused on resolving the past. He wasn't wrong exactly. I was spending more time and emotional energy looking for my father than I was investing in our relationship. The weight of that revelation settled heavily between us, another consequence of my long-ago decision that continued to ripple through generations. My choice to leave hadn't just affected Maria and me, but had created patterns of longing and searching that influenced my daughter's ability to form secure attachments with other people. She'd inherited not just my features and Maria's determination, but also the particular kind of restlessness that comes from having unresolved questions about identity and belonging. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it more deeply than simple words could convey. "I'm sorry that my absence created problems in your life that extended far beyond just not having a father around. I never considered that the empty space I left might affect your other relationships, your ability to trust that people will stay, your capacity to believe that love doesn't require constant searching and proving." She was quiet for several miles, looking out at the Utah landscape, where late afternoon shadows were starting to stretch across valleys that held tiny farming communities established by pioneers who'd understood something about commitment and permanence that my generation seemed to have forgotten. When she finally spoke, her words carried the wisdom of someone who'd spent years in therapy, working through abandonment issues and attachment patterns. "I don't blame you, Dad," she said, and the second time she called me, that felt even more profound than the first. Mom made sure I understood that people make the best decisions they can with the information and emotional resources they have at the time. She said holding grudges against someone for choices they made when they were young and scared would be like blaming a tree for not bearing fruit before it was mature enough to produce a harvest. The forgiveness in her voice was more than I dared hope for during the 26 years when I occasionally allowed myself to wonder about the child I'd left behind in Phoenix. I'd imagined anger, resentment, demands for explanations and apologies, legal papers requiring financial support for all the years I'd been absent. Instead, I was receiving grace from someone who had every right to reject me, understanding from a daughter who'd been given every reason to hate the father who'd disappeared before she was born. "There's something else I need to tell you," Lily said as we approached the outskirts of Salt Lake City, where my route would end, and we'd have to decide what happened next in this unexpected reunion. "Mom left me some things that belonged to you, items you'd forgotten at the diner during those last few weeks before you transferred to Nevada. She kept them all these years, hoping someday she'd have a chance to return them." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small box wrapped in tissue paper, handling it with the careful reverence people give to objects that have taken on significance beyond their practical value. Inside was a worn leather wallet with my initials embossed on the front, containing expired credit cards and driver's licenses that documented the young man I'd been in 1998. There was also a silver harmonica that I'd completely forgotten about, something I used to play during breaks between routes when I was too young to worry about disturbing other people with my amateur musical attempts. "She said you played this sometimes while you were waiting for your order," Lily explained, holding the harmonica up to catch the late afternoon light streaming through the bus windows. "She said you weren't very good at it, but you had enthusiasm and you seemed to find comfort in making music, even when you were traveling alone. She thought maybe someday you'd want it back. Maybe someday you'd play it for your grandchildren." The possibility of grandchildren hit me like a revelation I hadn't considered. If Lily was 26 and eventually married and started a family, I could become a grandfather before I turned 50. I could have the opportunity to be present for the next generation in ways I'd failed to be present for my own daughter. I could learn from my mistakes, apply the wisdom that comes from decades of regret, and become the kind of family member I should have been from the beginning. "Do you want children someday?" I asked, hardly daring to hope that my second chance at family might extend beyond just reconnecting with Lily herself. "I do," she said with a smile that reminded me so strongly of Maria that I had to grip the steering wheel tighter to maintain control of my emotions. "I want to raise kids who grow up knowing they're loved, who never have to search for their identity, who understand that family isn't perfect but it's permanent. I want to be the kind of mother Mom was to me, but I also want my children to have grandparents and aunts and uncles, and all the extended connections that make people feel rooted in something bigger than just their immediate household." As we pulled into the Salt Lake City bus terminal, I realized that this conversation wasn't ending but beginning. Lily had found me, but now we both faced the challenge of figuring out how to build a relationship that had been 26 years in the making. She had a life in Phoenix, a job she loved, friends and community connections that anchored her to Arizona. I had routes to drive, schedules to maintain, a simple apartment in Reno that held 45 years of accumulated solitude. But we also had something more powerful than geography or routine, or the practical complications of merging two separate lives that had developed in completely different directions. We had love that had survived decades of separation, hope that had motivated a 3-month search across multiple states, and the kind of second chance that most people only dream about receiving. The Salt Lake City bus terminal at sunset is not the most romantic location for life-changing conversations, but it became the place where my daughter and I made decisions that would reshape both our futures in ways we couldn't yet fully comprehend. As passengers collected their luggage and dispersed toward their various destinations, Lily and I sat in the empty bus, neither of us quite ready to step outside and face the practical questions about what comes after a miracle finally happens. "I don't have to be back in Phoenix until Monday," she said, checking her phone for the date and apparently calculating how much time we had before real life resumed its demands on both of us. "I took a leave of absence from work to search for you, so I have flexibility that I wouldn't normally have. I was wondering, would you show me where you live? I'd like to see the place you call home, understand how you've been spending your life all these years." The invitation to share my personal space with someone else felt both thrilling and terrifying after decades of carefully maintained privacy. My apartment in Reno was functional rather than welcoming, designed for a man who came home only to sleep and prepare for the next route. I had no photographs on the walls, no personal decorations that would tell a visitor anything about my interests or history, no evidence that anyone important had ever been part of my life. It was the home of someone who'd been running from connections rather than building them. "It's not much," I warned her, "and it's going to take us about 4 hours to drive there from here. I have a rental car that I use when I'm not working, and you're welcome to stay in my guest room if you don't mind basic accommodations and a refrigerator that's probably empty, except for coffee and expired milk." She laughed, and the sound filled the empty bus with warmth that had been missing from my life longer than I could remember. "Dad, I've been sleeping in bus stations and cheap motels for 3 months. Your couch would feel like luxury to me right now. Besides, I'm not interested in your decorating skills. I want to know you, understand how you live, see the place where my father comes home at the end of his routes." The drive to Reno gave us 4 more hours of uninterrupted conversation, and by the time we reached my apartment complex just after midnight, I felt like I was beginning to understand the remarkable woman my daughter had become, despite my absence from her life. She told me about her volunteer work with refugee families, helping them navigate American systems and bureaucracy while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. She described her love for hiking in Arizona mountains, her attempts to learn Spanish so she could better serve bilingual clients, her dream of eventually opening her own counseling practice specializing in family reunification services. Every story she shared revealed someone who'd inherited Maria's compassion and determination while developing her own unique perspective on helping people heal from separation and loss. I realized that my absence, while painful, had also contributed to her understanding of what it means to search for belonging, to hope for connections that seem impossible, to believe that love can survive years of separation if it's genuine and persistent. "This is it," I said as we climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, suddenly aware of how sparse and temporary my living space would appear to someone who'd been expecting to find evidence of a full life rather than just a place to sleep between bus routes. "I know it's not much, but it's been home for 15 years now." Lily stepped inside and immediately went to the large window that overlooked the city lights of Reno, where late-night casino signs and street lamps created a constellation of human activity that continued long after most people had gone to sleep. "It's peaceful," she said after a moment, "and the view is beautiful. I can see why you chose this place. It feels like you're part of the city, but also separate from it, connected but not overwhelmed." Her ability to find something positive in my austere living space reminded me of Maria's gift for seeing beauty in situations where other people might focus on limitations or problems. She walked through my small apartment with genuine interest, not judging the lack of personal touches, but trying to understand what the space revealed about the man who'd lived there alone for so many years. "Where do you keep your photographs?" she asked, opening cabinets and drawers with the unself-conscious curiosity of someone who's trying to piece together a puzzle they've been working on their entire life. "I don't have any," I admitted, feeling embarrassed by the stark evidence of how thoroughly I'd avoided creating or maintaining connections with other people. "I've never been much for taking pictures or saving mementos. I guess I've lived like someone who was always temporary, always just passing through." She was quiet for a moment, processing this information and probably trying to understand how someone reaches middle age without accumulating the photographic evidence that most people use to document relationships, experiences, and personal history. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through hundreds of pictures, showing me glimpses of the life I'd missed, but also sharing her world with me in real time. "This is Mom when she graduated from nursing school," she said, holding up a picture of Maria wearing a cap and gown, her smile radiant with pride and accomplishment. She was 31, working full-time and going to school at night, but she never complained about how difficult it was. She said education was the best gift she could give both of us, that learning was something no one could take away from you, even if everything else in life changed. The photographs continued. Maria and Lily at various birthdays and holidays, graduation ceremonies and family gatherings with friends who'd become chosen family when biological relatives weren't available. Lily's school achievements, soccer games, prom pictures with friends, college graduation, where she stood alone because Maria had been too sick from chemotherapy to attend. Each image told the story of a life lived fully, despite the absence of one crucial person, a mother and daughter who'd created joy and celebrated milestones without waiting for someone else to make their family complete. "She kept one picture of you," Lily said, scrolling to a photo I'd never seen before. "She took it secretly at the diner during your last week there, when you were looking out the window and didn't realize she was watching you. She said you looked like someone who was already leaving, even when you were still sitting right there, and she wanted to remember how young and hopeful you looked before life made you more careful about who you trusted with your heart." The image showed a version of myself I barely recognized, someone who still believed that the world was full of possibilities, that traveling alone was an adventure rather than a form of hiding, that independence was freedom rather than just another word for loneliness. Looking at that 22-year-old face, I understood why Maria had fallen in love with me. But I also understood why she'd let me go when it became clear I wasn't ready for the kind of commitment that raising a child requires. "I want to hear about your life too," Lily said, settling onto my couch with the natural ease of someone who makes herself at home wherever she goes. "Not just the big events, but the daily details. What makes you happy? What do you worry about? What do you think about during all those hours alone on the road? I want to know the man my father became, not just remember the boy who left before I was born." The next 3 days became a crash course in father-daughter bonding that should have taken place over decades, but instead had to be compressed into a long weekend of intensive sharing, learning, and decision-making about how to move forward as family members who'd spent most of their lives as strangers. I called in sick for my Monday route, something I hadn't done in over 8 years, and spent every waking hour with Lily, showing her around Reno, introducing her to the few co-workers I considered friends, and slowly opening up about the life I'd built around avoiding exactly the kind of deep connection we were now creating together. She met my supervisor, Carmen Rodriguez, who'd been trying for years to convince me to apply for promotion to route coordinator or training supervisor, positions that would keep me closer to home base instead of constantly traveling. "Your father is the most reliable driver we've ever had," Carmen told Lily, "but he's also the most mysterious. In 20 years of working together, I don't think he's ever mentioned having family anywhere. He's like a ghost who shows up to work every day, does his job perfectly, and then disappears back into his own private world." The description stung because it was accurate, and hearing it from someone who'd worked with me for 2 decades helped me understand how thoroughly I'd succeeded in avoiding the kind of personal relationships that make life meaningful. I'd been so focused on not repeating the mistake of abandoning someone who needed me that I'd never given anyone the opportunity to need me in the first place. "I think I understand why you chose this life," Lily said, as we walked through downtown Reno that evening, past casinos and restaurants, where people gathered to celebrate, commiserate, and connect with each other in ways I'd been watching from the outside for decades. After leaving Mom and me, you probably felt like you didn't deserve the kind of happiness that comes from family and community. You punished yourself by choosing isolation, convincing yourself that being alone was noble, rather than just another form of running away. Her insight was so accurate it took my breath away, and I realized that my daughter had inherited not just physical features from both her parents, but also an emotional intelligence that allowed her to see patterns and motivations that I'd spent years hiding even from myself. She understood me better after 4 days than I'd understood myself after decades of carefully not examining my choices too closely. The question now, she continued, linking her arm through mine as we walked past other families enjoying their evening together, is whether you're ready to stop punishing yourself and start living like someone who deserves love and connection. Because I'm not going back to Phoenix to wait another 26 years for you to decide you're worthy of having a daughter who wants to be part of your life. The ultimatum was delivered with gentle firmness, and I understood that this was my daughter giving me the same choice Maria had offered 26 years earlier: commit to being present and engaged, or lose the opportunity for family connection forever. The difference was that now I was 48 instead of 22, mature enough to understand what I'd be giving up, experienced enough to know that a life without love is just an extended form of dying slowly. "What are you proposing?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew what she was going to suggest. "I want you to move to Phoenix," she said simply, "request a transfer to Arizona routes, or find a job with a different bus company, or retire early and try something completely new. I want us to live in the same city, spend holidays together, build the kind of relationship that starts with shared meals and regular phone calls, and gradually grows into the kind of family bond that makes people feel like they belong somewhere specific." The idea terrified me almost as much as it excited me. Phoenix represented everything I'd run away from 26 years earlier: responsibility, commitment, the possibility of disappointing people who were counting on me to show up consistently. But Phoenix also represented everything I'd been missing during decades of solitude: family dinners, birthday celebrations, someone to worry about, and someone who worried about me. The kind of daily interactions that transform a house into a home and an individual into part of something larger and more meaningful. "I'll need time to make arrangements," I said, realizing even as I spoke that my decision was already made. "Give notice to the company, find someone to take over my apartment lease, figure out what to do with 45 years of accumulated stuff that suddenly seems less important than it did a week ago." Lily's smile was radiant enough to power the neon signs we were walking past, and when she hugged me right there on the sidewalk in front of strangers who had no idea they were witnessing a family reunion that had been 26 years in the making, I understood for the first time what it felt like to be someone's priority, someone's chosen family, someone worth changing your entire life to be closer to. 6 months later, I was living in a small house 3 miles from Lily's apartment in Phoenix, driving regional routes that brought me home every night instead of keeping me away for days at a time. I'd taken a pay cut and given up the independence I'd treasured for decades, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable: the daily experience of being needed, wanted, and loved by someone who'd spent her entire life hoping her father would eventually choose her over his fear of commitment. Lily and David reconciled after she was able to demonstrate that finding her father had actually made her more available for their relationship rather than less. Understanding where she came from had settled the restlessness that had made it difficult for her to fully invest in building a future with someone else. They married 8 months after my move to Phoenix, and I had the honor of walking my daughter down the aisle, giving her away to someone who understood that he wasn't just marrying Lily, but becoming part of a family that had been created through patience, forgiveness, and the kind of love that survives decades of separation. Today, 2 years after that first meeting at the Nevada truck stop, I'm expecting my first grandchild. Lily is 5 months pregnant with a little boy they plan to name Robert, after both his grandfather and his great-grandfather, who died before I was old enough to understand what it meant to carry someone's name and honor their memory. This baby will grow up knowing all his family members, surrounded by people who understand that love is a choice you make every day, rather than just a feeling you hope will last. As I finish this story, I want to speak directly to those of you who've stayed with me through this entire journey. If you're still here, it's because you understand that it's never too late to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, presence over absence. Maybe you're someone who's been searching for family, or someone who needs to make amends for past choices, or someone who's afraid to believe that second chances really exist in this world. I want you to know that your story matters too, that your search for belonging and your hope for reconciliation deserve the same patience and persistence that brought Lily and me together. Every time you share stories like this, every time you open your heart to the possibility that love can heal years of separation, you're creating space for other people to believe in their own second chances. If this story has reminded you of relationships in your own life that deserve attention, conversations that need to happen, or forgiveness that needs to be offered or accepted, please don't wait another 26 years to take action. Subscribe to our channel not just for entertainment, but because you believe that hope is contagious, that love stories need to be told, and that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary forgiveness when they choose connection over resentment. Leave a comment and tell us about your own family reunions, your search for belonging, or the moments when you decided to choose love over fear. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that it's never too late to come home, never too late to say you're sorry, never too late to become the person your family needs you to be. This is more than just a channel. It's a community for people who understand that the most beautiful stories are about ordinary people who decide that love is worth the risk of being vulnerable, that family is worth the effort of forgiveness, and that hope is always worth believing in no matter how many years have passed since you last dared to trust that miracles still happen for people who need them most.